Welcome to the Life's Best Medicine podcast, where we are finding hope and healing one episode at a time. No appointment needed, no rubber gloves, and no coping. Just a healthy dose of life lessons to help equip you for this wild journey we call life. Hey everyone, this is a friendly reminder that we are here for entertainment purposes only. We may not even be that entertaining at times, but this is not medical advice. Talk to your doctor, check with your healthcare professionals before making any lifestyle changes or medicine changes. What we're talking about is our clinical experience and what we've seen. And so if you really want our advice, you can consult us. You can actually consult me as a doctor, or you can consult my guest and get all your questions answered. But we can't give free medical advice because we can't pay our bills with that, but we can help to educate you a bit and allow you to think a little bit. And always reach out to your medical professional before making any lifestyle changes. Thank you. Hey everyone, it's the end of May, beginning of June. And I want to thank my sponsors for bringing these episodes. There's some great ones coming up in the next couple months. Health Code, thank you. It's Get Health, GETHLTH. They have some great shakes, high protein, good fats, and I made ice cream out of it. So I made the vanilla ice cream and added some strawberries, and really was a hit at my Memorial Day barbecue, and also made their maple protein bars. All this is on their website at gethealth.com. And also we have a discount code. If you get their product, it's called MetHealth, M-E-T for metabolic health, H-E-A-L-T-H. And also Keto Mojo, thank you so much. I'm using them for monitoring glucose and ketone levels. And my patients love using it, getting their direct information very quickly, and they can share it with me. So it really makes life easy and helps us stay accountable and helps us double check on the continuous glucose monitors to make sure the sugars are correct. So Health Code and Keto Mojo, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate you. And thank you for bringing these episodes as we all get ready for summer. Hello and welcome back to the Life's Best Medicine podcast. I got a cool guy today who has quite a remarkable story. We've crossed paths a couple of times. I think I knew him from Twitter, and I actually met him and I didn't realize it was the same person, right? I think you even changed your handle. So we have Antman, Carnal Dancer. A lot of people know him from social media. So welcome. Good to have you.
Well, thank you very much. Before I get started on anything, I did want to get a little bit of housekeeping out of the way. First of all, I am not a healthcare practitioner. I did grow up in a medical family. My stepfather is a doctor. I can't discuss what I do for a living for legal reasons, but suffice to say, I'm not a hitman for the mob. But of course, that's what a hitman for the mob would probably say anyway. But I, for legal reasons, I can't talk about my actual profession, but it has nothing to do with healthcare. I'm a patient in your direct primary care practice, and you're free. We can discuss anything you want, except of course that man I did not shoot in Reno. Just keep that away. And as you said, I'm Carnal Dancer on Twitter, but I want to make clear I'm actually not a carnivore. I've never really been a strict carnivore. Amber O'Hearn would definitely say I was never a strict carnivore. I'll talk. There'll be good reason. I'll talk about why. I do, however, dance a great deal. I'm a two-time world champion in pro-am ballroom dancing, but I really have to explain that. I'm the world pro-am top male student, meaning in pro-am, I'm the amateur, the student in dancing. I won the world championship in 2020 and in 2021. For those of you who aren't aware, there was a panic that went on in 2020 and 2021. And all of the people who would have competed with me, or almost all of them, were probably hiding out at home. Whereas I decided to go out there and spend time with what I called my immunity buddies, so that we were going to spread our germs with each other and live real lives. And I'm kind of like the one-armed pitcher who won the MVP in World War II, because all the guys with talent were fighting the war. So in 2020, I was out there competing. I started competing almost immediately. Well, actually, immediately when there were competitions available after the lockdown started, and had to travel around the country to do it with my partner. So as a result, because I was out there, I won 2 world championships for 2020 and 2021. Unfortunately, all the good guys have now come back, so I'll probably never win again. But did want to get those things.
Hey, bask in the glory, and you got extra practice while they were sitting around.
Hey, my name will be on the internet, and the internet is forever. So anyone who wants to check out my story or check out my listing, if you go to dancesportseries.com and you look at past winners of the World Pro-Am, you will see under male student that Les Antman was the winner in 2020 and 2021. So yeah, I'm gonna take full credit for it. Won't let anyone know the real reason when I don't have to. But for the sake of disclosure here, I thought I should.
Well, we don't have you here for your dance skills. We want to hear about your health and what happened with that.
Yeah, well, let's go through my history. I was born 66 years ago this hour. So this is actually my birthday. And
happy birthday. Is that what you scheduled today?
Yeah, it's I've scheduled as of the day we're recording this. It is my birthday. I was born in Eastern times. I was born in New York at 6 o'clock. So basically, I'm 66 at 6. I hope that's not a bad omen. With all the 6s that we have. Born in New York, moved to California. My parents divorced, and so I moved to Southern California when I was 6. Oh, this is really becoming a theme, isn't it? And I've been in Southern California ever since, other than the time I spent in college. I went to Cal up in Berkeley. So I was normal weight growing up throughout school. But of course, when I was in school, almost everybody was reasonably normal weight. I'm sure that had something to do with the fact that the dietary guidelines of America had not yet been created. So schools probably serve better food. But another big thing is my mother worked for a meat packing company. So 3 nights a week, I had lamb chops. 3 nights a week, I had steak. And the big treat once a week was spaghetti and meatballs. So I was pretty much brought up on meat. And the big treat once a week, my cheat, I guess, was spaghetti and meatballs, which was always my favorite because it was something I didn't have normally. To this day, I love cheat days. So I'm very different from some others. I actually believe in them. So I graduated from high school, slender, reasonable. I mean, I wasn't the strongest guy, but it was #1 varsity on the tennis team. So I was pretty good shape. Then I went to college. First thing I did in the dormitories is I started drinking the non-fat milk. And since there was a family history of diabetes, I drank Tab. I don't know how many people remember. There was the first version of Diet Coca-Cola was called Tab. It was absolutely dreadful. I think it was based on saccharin. But I drank it all the time in order to avoid sugar. I thought that would be a good idea. I also took up distance running. And back then, maybe even now, but certainly back then, everyone who was a distance runner knew you had to be on a high carb diet. Carb loading was critical. So I was running.
Professor Noakes.
Yeah, I thought so. I mean, I didn't get it from Tim, but yeah, Tim Noakes believed it and I believed it. That's what everybody believed. I mean, one of the Olympians made a comment. He said his diet was pizza, beer, and Fruit Loops. And he looked really healthy. Of course, he was in his 20s, so you can get away with a lot when you're in your 20s. But I started gaining weight without even noticing it. And that's not that unusual. I figured as a runner, I would not gain weight. I could eat whatever I wanted. And I thought high carb was healthy. But I did gradually build up weight. My family, every single member of my immediate family became diabetic. My biological father, although I didn't see him after the divorce, but genetically, obviously, I come from him. So he was diabetic. My mother was diabetic. I have 2 brothers, or I had 2 brothers. My older brother was diabetic. He gradually he lost his toes and he lost his leg. Then he eventually died of complications from diabetes. Since he died in 2020, though, they did put on his death certificate that one of the causes of his death was COVID, even though he had no respiratory issues. But back then, I think to get the extra bonus, they just described it as COVID, but it was clearly complications from diabetes that he died from. My younger brother was also diabetic for many years. He reversed it by following my lead, going on a keto diet. And I'll get to that very, very quick. I had metabolic syndrome. By the time, I don't know when, probably by my 40s at the latest. The problem is I never went to doctors. I avoided doctors, had a very bad early experience. My pediatrician weighed 300 pounds and smoked. And when I was in college, I was still a teenager. I entered Berkeley when I was 17 and graduated when I was 20. But when I went to the doctor, one of the last visits, I'm still a kid, so still going to our family pediatrician. He was advising me to cut down on running. When I told him I ran 60 miles a week, his first reaction is, why on earth are you running 60 miles a week? I think I gave him a smart ass answer, like, because it's too far to walk. But in any event, he said, well, I don't think it's healthy. And the reason he didn't think it was healthy is that my heart rate was in the 40s and my blood pressure was 90/60. So he was worried about my low blood pressure and heartbeat. And he was 300 pounds and smoking at the time. So
Sounds about right for medicine.
Yeah, I'll tell you. So I turned away from doctors. I didn't even go for annual checkups. I never had any blood tests. This is the absolute God's honest truth. Over the course of my life, I have paid for more blood tests for Dave Feldman than for myself. I was one of the people, I gave him some early money. I was a monthly contributor for quite a while, also helping his current project. And he was, of course, doing all these blood tests with all the hacks. Dave is wonderful. But I'm paying for all these blood tests for him and yet never getting any for my own. Because I did not trust doctors until I found one who wasn't going to recommend a statin because I had a 160 LDL. Finally, I did find somebody, you, and now I feel confident going in for annual checkups and getting blood tests. But for a long time, I just didn't. But I did occasionally end up doing it. And so I cobbled it all together. And I definitely had metabolic syndrome. I was in the high 100s, I think, on my triglycerides. My HDL was down around 30. My blood pressure was not terrible because it had started low from running, but in one of my readings by the time I was in my 40s and I wasn't running regularly anymore, I think like the diastolic got up to 85, which I think might even qualify there. My waist, that was embarrassing. I went up on one of the trips I went to, I couldn't fit into any of the pants. And I had to go to the store to buy new pants. And the only thing that fit me was a size 38s. And so I thought it was a 38-inch waist, but I found out later they lie. I thought they only lied about women's sizes, but it turns out that if you wear a size 34, it's not 34 inches. It's probably 36 inches or 37 inches. So I probably had a 40-inch waist. And my blood pressure, my HbA1c got to around 6.0. So 5.9, 6.0, 6.1. I can't remember exactly, but it was in the pre-diabetic range. I wasn't ill other than being tired every afternoon and being clearly overweight, but I did have, I think, pretty much all 5 of the measures of metabolic syndrome, and that continued into my early 50s. And then my life was changed by 3 men and a babe. So I want to give credit to the people who changed my life. The first one was Tom Naughton. His movie, documentary, Fathead, which was a takedown of Morgan Spurlock's Super Size Me. It's a very funny movie, but it also gave me an understanding of the role of insulin in weight. And it was a very sensible approach. Tom is a non-obsessive low carber, very relaxed, laid back. His movie talked about him going low carb, which he described as being around 100 grams. And he showed what he did day by day. And you saw, well, some days it went to 110, 120, other days it was 80 or 90. When I say non-obsessive, it was just in general, cut down on carbs, and that should be enough. And I'll talk about that. I actually did it, but since I mentioned 3 men and a babe, I don't want to forget any of these people who changed my life. Michael Eads is the second one, the second man. I love him because he's a lifelong learner. He's still, to this day, talking about things he did not know and did not talk about in the past. He's brought up like the seed oils, which was not a part of his early, well, I first found out about him from the movie, from Tom's movie, then from reading Protein Power, the book he and Mary Dan Eads, his wife, co-wrote. But I watch him now continuously. He still comes to conferences. He always has something new to cover, very interesting. He has a newsletter I love. You should all subscribe to it if you can, which isn't mainly about diet. It's anything he wants to talk about, but it does include that. He's a lifelong learner. He also has something that he has in common with me, which is he loves a book called The Basic Laws of Human Stupidity. And it talks about all the harm that stupid people, stupid meaning ignorant, not really meaning dumb, can do. I live my life based on Hanlon's razor, which is never attribute to malice what can be adequately explained as stupidity. And in this world, I think that's really important, because you can start to think there are a whole bunch of evil people in the world when it's just they're ignorant. I mean, there are a lot of doctors who gave terrible advice to their patients, and you could play the game of saying, well, pharma owns them, the pretty drug reps who come in and give them all the information. But the truth is they didn't know any better. Ken Berry, when he wrote Lies My Doctor Told Me, admitted he was giving horrible advice. He was fat. And, until he learned. You probably would say similarly that you used to give advice that wasn't as good as it is today. There are some people, obviously, who are self-interested, but they don't all mean poorly. A lot of times they rationalize, they persuade themselves that what they're saying is true. And it becomes hard to change views. People don't like to admit they were wrong. So Michael, I love, because Michael Eads, I even named one of my diet plans after him. I call it the Eads diet. It's EADES, eat a damn enormous steak. And so that's my version of the Eads diet. He's not a carnivore either, but I decided to honor him with that. The third one is the least known to people, and I think a really important one. And his name is Gabor Erdosi. Gabor is not known. He lives in Hungary. He's never been to the United States as far as I know. He doesn't appear on, he doesn't go to the conferences that we all go to, but he is in my view, possibly the researcher who is farthest ahead, who's really looking to, he's interested in explaining anomalies. So he's not low carb. He wants to find mechanisms. And when it's not, there are some societies where they're not low carb, but they're doing well. He wants to find out why. And he keeps going upstream. A few years ago, I said that if you want to know the cause of all of our health problems, you can blame the IRS. And by IRS, it was insulin resistance syndrome, which is now called metabolic syndrome. But thanks to Gabor Erdosi, I've changed my view. Now, instead of the IRS, I blame everything on the CIA, which is chronic immune activation. And he and Ivor just started a service called Metabolic Duo. And Gabor is a very high-level thinker. The great thing about Ivor is he brings it down to a language resembling English, or at least an Irish version of English. And they started Metabolic Duo, and they have a subscription service. I think it's around $12 a month. People like you, Brian, you are at the conferences, you're learning from so many different people, but there are a lot of healthcare practitioners who will say, well, I don't have the time for all of this. Well, if you want to know all of the up-to-date research and you don't have the time to follow everyone, the Metabolic Duo, in my mind, they started a month ago. They're absolutely brilliant. It's cutting edge. It's all the newest information. They have a Q&A, which is fantastic for the participants. They do a Zoom call like once every other week. And I think any healthcare practitioner who says they can't afford to spend $12 a month, probably tax deductible if they're a healthcare practitioner, and maybe an hour and a half every other week for the Zoom, including the Q&A. I'm not sure I would ever want to, work with someone like that.
Yeah, I'm having them on the podcast. I'm having them on, and I said, hey, there's one caveat. You guys can't ask me any questions because I probably won't be able to answer them. Because these guys are at a next level. They're really smart. Both of them are great guys, very smart, and they're not sold out. I think, I would question some people. I get it, it's ignorance, and some people are ignorance because their paycheck depends on it. So I think that's kind of what we've seen in medicine. I know people who've sold out. I know people are getting a paycheck to badmouth other people out there. I've seen,
Yeah.
6 people attack Jason Fung for no reason. So you start saying, hey, look, if you're ignorant is one thing, I can forgive that, but sometimes it's blatant, and so when you have people like Ivor going through and Gabor, like saying, here's the data, here's what the study actually says, because so many times people see a headline and then they rush off and say, oh my gosh, this is the verdict, okay, it's, keto is bad for you or whatever. So it's hard because you need balanced people, and I know both of them, and if it ever came out that what they were saying was incorrect, they would correct themselves.
Right. And the thing about, Gabor doesn't make other than, I think, what the consulting he does, did a little bit of consulting on metabolic health. He isn't owned by anybody, doesn't work for a drug company, doesn't, you had to get away from a corporate setup in order to really be completely your own man. And you did, right? You made the decision to do that. But Gabor also at one time, he worked for companies, I think, that were involved in food processing. So a lot of what he learned from all the things that they were doing to get people to eat stuff. And but he's no longer doing that. And he's trying to, he wants to live a life in which he can be completely true to himself. I think he's doing a wonderful job. And I love the combination of the two of them. So I'm thrilled you're going to have them on, because they are just fantastic. And a lot of the things I do nowadays result from that. Gabor did a lecture in Prague 5 years ago in 2018. You can find it online, just Gabor Erdosi, Erdosi, Prague, and I'm sure you'll find the lecture. And it's absolutely brilliant. Even though he personally, I believe he's relatively low carb, he's talking about more than that. And I do think it's more than that. Anyway, 3 Men and a Babe. Sorry, I can't forget Amber O'Hearn. She's the babe. She's the one who made me look at a second time at carnivore. I have to admit, when I started my journey, I found friendliness and supportiveness almost everywhere. When I went to Mark's Daily Apple, Mark Sisson, or a lot of the low carb sites. I mean, Tom Naughton had people who were following him, and there were a few others, and Keto Dudes. Everywhere I went, everyone was friendly. And then I went to a carnivore site, and probably I went to the wrong one, but I was met for the first time with a zealotry that I just could not handle. It was people I had to be very, very careful about every word I said, because if I didn't allow for the fact that certain people could not make exceptions, then they jump all over you. And these were people who drank coffee, and some of them actually drank a little alcohol, which are plant-based. But if you mentioned that you went to In-N-Out and had a lettuce wrap sandwich, they would go ballistic over lettuce is not permitted in a carnivore diet, which strict carnivore diet. And there's some people who probably have to avoid lettuce. But the reaction just made me turn it off and say, well, okay, carnivore is the equivalent of vegan. Just a bunch of zealots. And then I met Amber, and Amber is not a zealot. Amber, first of all, understands its context. There are some people, with rheumatoid arthritis, where they may have to go 100% plant-free in order to relieve their symptoms or to relieve inflammation. There are people with mental health reasons. And carnivore does have a great advantage, which is it's incredibly simple. Carnivore works for almost everybody I've known who's tried it, but that doesn't mean it's necessary. There's a difference between the two. And Amber was like the first real human being I met, who you could talk to pleasantly, who wasn't looking to be offended when you talked to them about carnivore and you didn't have a 100% comfort with it. So I give her a lot of credit for what happened, but I keep getting away from what my diet is. So I guess sooner or later, I better tell you how I fixed myself. I've already said in the early 50s.
Yeah, first let's hear what made you switch. Like, what was your switch point? Go, I got to change something.
The funny part is that there wasn't a health scare. I was one of those people. I remember when people would die of COVID, you hear healthy young person dies of COVID, and they weren't healthy. they probably had all the, three or more, they probably had metabolic syndrome. They're overweight, but because they didn't have a diagnosed disease yet, they were viewed as healthy. I did not have any scares, any health scares. I was tired all the time. And at one time I went vegetarian for a couple of years. And it's funny, that's the only diet I strictly adhered to. And I did it for what I viewed at the time as ethical reasons. And I joked about the fact that after 2 years, I finally gave it up when I found out that the Dalai Lama eats meat and Hitler was a vegetarian. So there went my ethical arguments. But the reality was I was feeling worse and worse, just tired all the time. And I was gaining weight and I was running at the time. So I was an overweight running vegetarian. So now I'm a metabolically optimal dancing carnivore or near carnivore. So what got me to look at, I started looking at health because of my wife's health. I was married for over 30 years to a wonderful woman who unfortunately died in 2015. She and I both got, I got overweight. She got morbidly obese. She was 5'5" and got to 242 pounds. And she was dieting all the time. She went back to Weight Watchers repeatedly, and she would get some success, then rebound, some success, then rebound, like so many others. And she finally got up to 242 pounds. And I was thinking, oh God, how do we deal with this? So part of my motivation was helping her. A lot of it, though, I think in retrospect, was probably related to the side effects of the medication she took, because she did have MS, multiple sclerosis. And at the time of her passing, she was taking 16 drugs on a daily basis, including, drugs that stimulate cortisol, drugs that are known to have weight as a side effect. And all of those were a problem. So finding an answer for her was a little part of it, but I fumbled around a lot. And unfortunately, she died of pancreatic cancer. She had a very heavy sugar-based diet. Her argument was, I'm always in pain, because the form of MS she had was not physical disability, but neurogenic pain 24/7. And unless she took very high levels of pain medication, she couldn't get through the day. In fact, she never got through the day. She only got through the night. We would sleep we were vampires. We basically slept until mid-afternoon. The only reason we got up at all is because to get to her doctor's appointments, well, doctors do go home eventually. So we would always get their 5 o'clock appointment. And the doctors loved us because we didn't mind if they ran late. And of course, doctors, because they can't rely on patients being there on time, and they don't know the exact time anything's going to take. And remember, in most practices, they don't allow nearly enough time. They allow 5-7 minutes for each patient. So we would always do the last appointment, but we spent all the time in the dark, because the hotter the temperature, the worse she felt. And everything was wrong. The entire lifestyle was a fattening lifestyle. So that was more my motivation, was helping her. And for me, everyone in my family, as I mentioned, was diabetic except me, and I was now pre-diabetic. So I thought it really would be kind of nice if we went in the other direction. I didn't think I was going to die necessarily soon, but I was interested in it. But I never really started following a good diet until she passed away. She died in August of 2015. And the day she died, I changed my diet. I already knew, thanks to Tom Naughton and some of the other stuff, that low carb was going to be the way I was going. So in August of 2015, I had I wasn't at a 40-inch waist because I'd made some changes to my breakfast. I still had a lousy dinner because I ate whatever my wife wanted, and she always wanted to split a dessert. And I was still eating pretty lousy late at night. Plus I had all the lifestyle issues that cause weight. But when she died, I immediately started doing everything that I thought was right. Now, I focused on low carb. I didn't try to be ketogenic. I'm not even sure I knew that keto was a big thing. But I started going low carb, just Tom Naughton's way. I think I used the list of foods that Eric Westman had put together. I think it was in the back of a Gary Taubes book. why we get fat. And it's just meat, eggs, seafood, and salad veggies primarily. And I made sure I was comfortably under 100 carbs, 100 grams of carbs. And by December, I had lost all the excess weight. In fact, I got down to my current waist size in 4 months in 2015 on ordinary low carb. At least at the time, that's what I thought. I lost all my excess weight. I think now it may not be low carb alone. And that's why I'm on Life's Best Medicine and not the low carb MD. Because I think it's more than low carb.
Well, I think that's what we're all coming to that conclusion.
Yeah.
I'm having, calling it Arizona metabolic health and San Diego metabolic health, because there's more to it. You can't just say, okay, I'm going to eat, brownies made out of almonds and think you're going to be okay. And so there's a lot, especially if you're stressed and tense and hate the world and you don't sleep and you're fighting with your neighbors and being a jerk. So, the spiritual aspects, the emotional aspects are all critical for sure.
Yeah, I definitely came to that conclusion. But at the time, it just seemed like low carb. 2017, I went keto. And that, again, was really for somebody else. I had a friend who was rebound stage 4 ovarian cancer. And I knew, and she was taking chemotherapy. And although I didn't believe in the treatment that she was getting, one of the things that I think is becoming more conventionally accepted is that keto may reduce the side effects from chemotherapy. So even though most cancer doctors will not acknowledge that maybe when you look at PET scans and the fact that you find cancer cells by the ones that love glucose, they would not concede that, but at least they have enough evidence now that it reduces the side effects of chemotherapy. So I told her I would go keto if she did. And we both went keto in 2017. And I suddenly had an explosion of energy I couldn't believe. Low carb is all I needed to lose weight. But when I went ketogenic, once I got past the transition phase, the first week was a little bit rough. I suddenly found that my energy, I didn't need to take breaks between dance lessons, which I had always had to take before. I started getting up at dawn. To this day, I wake up at the crack of dawn, even if I went to sleep late, and I feel really energetic. And that didn't happen until keto. So I didn't need it for weight loss, but oh my God, what it did for my energy was wonderful. So that was 2 years after. Low carb was 2015, keto was 2017. That's also the year I invented my most famous mnemonic. In fact, it's so famous that most people don't even know I developed it. 6 years ago, it's the meds mnemonic. When people ask, what do you do? What's your diet? And they said, whenever I'm hungry, I take my meds. And meds is MEDS, meat, eggs, dairy, and seafood. And I came up with that mnemonic and I put it on Facebook, put it on Twitter. A bunch of people started using it. I think for a while, people knew I'd come up with it. Then after a while, it got passed on to other people who had no idea where it came from. And then some people started claiming credit for it themselves. I don't care. They can claim all the credit they want. But I had a lot of fun with that. I love to come up with little memory devices. So whenever I'm hungry, I take my meds became my first focus. And I went keto and it worked great. Then because of Amber, I had thought about carnivore again. And since it seems like every 2 years I should do something different, in 2019, I decided to try carnivore. And for that, I have to thank Guy in Austin. So I think Guy in Austin gave you his first name, right, Mike? I mean,
he's a great guy. Yeah.
Well, I know
he's a great guy.
Oh, I know he's a fantastic guy. I just want to make sure that he doesn't want to keep secret what his actual name, at least his first name is. But anyway, sometimes I call him Guy because you get so used to calling him Guy in Austin. Nobody ever.
Yeah, I thought that's what his name was initially. I thought that was his name. I'm like, oh, you have a different name. Oh, I learned as it's funny because on Twitter you make friends, and I've been at conferences. Yep. I had lunch with someone one day, and he's a great guy. And then I went up to my hotel room. And I texted him. On Twitter, I sent him a private message. I was like, when are we getting together? He said, we just had lunch. I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that was your handle. I didn't know. So it's funny sometimes that you don't even know, what the real name is. Because I thought his name was Guy also. I'm like, oh, Guy in Austin. Okay.
Yeah, well,
he's a great guy. And he's been a good support of the podcast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well,
Just don't tell him I said nice things about him,
oh, I'm afraid he's probably going to find out. But anyway, Mike, or a guy in Austin, will call me. He's not going to be offended either way. He had come up with it. He had mentioned something called WOBO, which he called week of burger only. And my problem with carnivore, I don't cook. I do not cook at all. I barely microwave, barely. So I eat every meal out, and I travel a lot because of the dance competitions that I go to. And so it wasn't practical, and everybody is down on fast food. But Mike pointed out that McDonald's quarter pounders are 100% beef, and they are not cooked in seed oils. They're cooked in their own fat, and that they're healthy. I mean, yes, of course, they have a lot of unhealthy stuff as well, but their burgers were healthy. And once I found that out, I said, oh, well, I can try a carnivore diet. So that January 2019, which is carnivore month every year, I went ahead and did it for most of the 30 days. One thing you have to know about me, I am never strict about anything. I'm an anarchist, so any rules I want to break them, including my own. So if I'm supposed to go 30 days without a single exception, it's not going to happen. I just don't want to do it. But I went pretty much 30 days. And I noticed a benefit that shocked the heck out of me. I mentioned with keto that I had new energy. Well, I haven't mentioned this, but I had hay fever from the time I was a kid, somewhere around my early teens, maybe around puberty. I started having terrible problems with a runny or stuffy nose all the time. And I mean all the time, not just during the summer, but 250 days a year. And I lived in LA, and back then smog may have been an issue as well, but I always had hay fever. I always had a runny nose. I was taking, I think about an old drug here, Brian, chlorpheniramine maleate was the antihistamine that I took almost on a daily basis. Again, my father was a doctor, so it was not hard I didn't even have to get a prescription for it. It was always in the house. And for 50 years, I had hay fever, and it was 200 to 250 days a year. Now, I did do shots at one point, and for a while it solved the problem. But then after several years, it started coming back again, and I didn't want to go through that whole series of shots again. And then when I went carnivore, I noticed suddenly, wait a minute, I haven't taken a Zyrtec, which had become my regular. I haven't taken a Zyrtec in like 2 weeks. And then I kept going, and I never had an allergy problem, except when I went to my brother's. Now, my younger brother, God bless him, when he saw the changes in me, was impressed enough to try it himself. I mentioned he was diabetic. He was diabetic for over a decade. His HbA1c got to 9.4. And he saw my weight loss and just my improved general health, and he decided to try it. So I gave him a book called Eat Bacon, Don't Jog, which pretty much was an oversimplified version of keto. And he went on it a month before his quarterly visit to his doctor. And 6.5 was his HbA1c after only 1 month. He went from 9.4 to 6.5. And as you know, HbA1c is supposedly an average of 3 months. And he was only on the diet for 1.
That's dramatic. Yeah. And we see this. I have a lady just now, it's been less than 3 months. She went from 11.1, and now we just got her at 6.7. And I know she's way better than that because it takes time. And all those terrible sugars are gone. But when you're sleeping better, your mood's better, your anxiety's better, all these other things get better. This is what we're talking about, metabolic health. That's what role we're playing, and I love also the fact that you are not a zealot. I think if you want people not to follow your cause, be an absolute zealot, right? If you're a religious zealot, people are going to go, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to whip myself with a chain every day to prove a point. And so, all that kind of stuff. And you go, you're never going to have a piece of bread again, or you're never going to do this, or you could only have meat. And if you have lettuce, you're a sinner, basically, right? So it's a hard thing because a lot of people feel that. I know Sean Baker, and Sean's like, hey, do what you want to do. He's not a radical in any sense of the word. Most of the people that are leaders, they go, hey, this is what I have to do. You may not have. For me, I have to be strict on the low carb, but other people, I know guys, I look at them, I go, liberalize your carbs. You're a triathlete. You're running all these miles. Your insulin's 2. Your triglycerides are 26. I think you're going to be okay for a while having some sweet potatoes. You know, but it's hard because some in that mindset, someone somewhere said you can never do this. You're going to die.
Yeah, it's one of the problems I see in the low carb community that as soon as I get to, I'm almost to modern days, which is like has been a real focus of mine mentally. I wanted to mention that the reason I mentioned my brother, by the way, his next quarterly visit, it went from 6.5 to 5.1. So
It's
now he's
amazing.
at 5.1, from 9.4 to 5.1, basically in 4 months. And the great thing about his doctor is that when he first came in at 6.5, his doctor said, he mentioned, well, I've changed my diet. And his doctor said, that's great. Just make sure you keep eating your fruits and vegetables. And my brother said he just laughed and okay, that's what the doctor wants to think. And then 3 months later, when he came in, it was a 5.1. And this is what a good doctor does. The doctor said, okay, Steve, my brother, Steve, tell me what you've been doing. And the doctor changed his practice. And the doctor now used to hate seeing diabetic patients because all you can do is manage the disease. And now he loves seeing his diabetic patients because he knows he can do something for them. So my brother changed
My
the
story
doctor.
right there. Yeah,
Isn't
that's
that
my story
wonderful?
too. It's
Oh,
amazing.
yeah, you have a patient, they did something different, and you're not closed-minded. You're thinking, you care about these people enough that even if your ego is involved, I was giving bad advice in the past, well, that doesn't justify giving bad advice now if you know better. And his doctor has changed his practice. So I love that. But he's keto, he's not carnivore. And I was carnivore in 2019. Every time I went to my brother's house for dinner, and my brother does most of the cooking, his wife also, is comfortable with, with his keto. They don't pick on each other. In other words, she's not keto, she's not, she makes exceptions, she can. And the family doesn't battle over food. I mean, I've never had the problem that a lot of people talk about where, their friends are their worst enemies. None of them have ever given me, crap for being low carb, or even carnivore. I think it has something to do with the fact that I don't try to convert them either, as I respect their differences. But I went to my brother's and the allergy came back. As I had a normal, very good ketogenic meal, but it included salads. We know spinach and almonds are definitely keto, but there are people who have arthritic problems because of the oxalates in them. Well, obviously my allergy somehow was affected by something in the plants, low carb plants, but the plants that I was eating whenever I went. So I went to his house and I had to take a Zyrtec the next day because I actually a few hours after the visit, because my nose started running again. It hadn't been running in months. And then the next time I went to visit him, the same thing happened. And the next time. Now, what I could have concluded is that, okay, I'm one of those people, it's just remission. There's something in some of those plants, I don't know which ones, that are giving me a problem. And if I really want to be allergy free, but I don't care about it. So what if I had to take a Zyrtec once every, a couple of months when I go visit him? But then after a year and a half, I went to my brother, I had one of their meals and I didn't have a reaction. So it wasn't remission anymore, it was reversal. Because now I can make exceptions to carnivore and find that it doesn't cause me to go back to what I was before.
Man, I think that was the same thing for me with the mold allergy that I had. It was really dramatic. It was really bad. And I had to take prednisone for 2 years and went low carb keto, and killed off a parasite that was bugging me from one of my medical trips. And give me all the mold you want, I'm fine. So it's amazing because it's horrible. And I know some of the people on the low carb, Georgia Ede had that where she went through a lot of stuff and then her diet fixed it. So for her, that's what she has to do. But if you're allergic to eggs, don't eat eggs, right? Don't say you have to eat eggs. Well, you're allergic to them, don't eat them, right? I mean, it's each of us are individual. So you can't really have, and I think you alluded to this or you specifically called it out, is these guidelines. And the problem is the doctors have stop thinking, and they see the person getting worse and worse, and they go, here's the guidelines I'm following, but I'll keep following these same guidelines and tell you the same thing. And then we're thinking the patient's not listening. So when you have someone with good outcomes, that's when you say, what are you doing? I want to hear more about it.
Yeah.
And so, it's a hard thing in medicine. I was just listening to it's a great podcast. Everyone should listen to it with Joe Rogan. He's a rookie at podcasting, but he had Asim Malhotra on, and it's a great, he's the greatest podcaster ever, but it's a great discussion, because he said, look, when I got better, I took the same regimen, and no one asked, like, how did you get better in 3 days, Joe, and not like be on the ventilator at that time. And no one wanted to hear it. They didn't want to hear what he did. And instead of saying, hey, if it worked for you, let's try it with some other people and see what happens, right? If they get better too, if they don't get better, we know it doesn't work. But that's a scientific method, and we have to be able to be free to experiment a little bit with ourselves.
Yeah, and so I started experimenting. So once I found, I went there and the same foods that was causing a problem aren't, and I wanted to see how far I could push it. So 2021 comes, it's another odd numbered year. I got to change my diet again. So I went to carnivore plus dessert, which I sometimes call carnivore plus cannoli. And now part of this was COVID. I mentioned that when 2020 hit, and we're all locked down middle of March. It was really funny because I was at the low-carb Denver conference.
We were both there.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think you may have canceled because you were worried you wouldn't be able to get back to take care of your patients. Are you sure?
No, I was there.
Okay.
No, I was there. I took heat for being there, because I was like, I'm already here. What am I going to do? Everything shut down in the middle of the conference. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was there, and when I arrived, one of the other people there said, you think we're going to have a problem? And I said, what could go wrong? We're starting this conference on Friday the 13th, and we're ending it on the Ides of March. So, because it was March 13th, it was Friday, and March 15th was the end of the conference. And of course, Colorado announced that there were no more gatherings permitted, but they did allow that conference to finish. And I was worried that California wouldn't let me back in.
And we had all kinds of extra room at the conference hall. It was beautiful, right? Because a lot of people just stayed in the rooms a lot. But yeah, I remember I'll never forget sitting with Ivor. We were having a socially distanced dinner, and I go, give me a long time till I see you again, man. It's gonna be a long time, because we knew it was coming. But and I'll say, no one from that meeting came down with COVID or got sick or killed anyone. I'll just put that on the record. But everyone was metabolically healthy, or trying to be metabolically healthy. So, it does make a difference. But, there was a lot of concerns that we would hurt the cause, because, you're being crazy, doing crazy stuff. But no one knew the when we got to that conference, we didn't know the impact. We didn't know. I mean, that happened while we were real time while we were there. And then coming home, I got shoved into a train with a ton of people, because they closed everything at once. They closed all the ski resorts, everything got closed. So in the airport was absolute insanity.
Oh, and the people, and some of the people you're talking about that train, I remember, because the Denver airport, there's a train to get to your gate, and the people there, they're in this crowded train, and some of them, oh my God, there was one guy, it's like our elbows accidentally touched, and he pulled away and looked at me like I had, just punched him, and he was so scared. And there were so many people. I remember that.
Kind of an odd guy. You're kind of an odd guy. It may have happened before COVID too.
It might have. It's possible, but I think it has something to do with that. Anyway, I made the decision. I was a good boy for a few weeks, and I tried to write about it. But as you know, if you wrote anything sensible, I started trying to get people to read about John Ioannidis's wonderful analysis of the Diamond Princess, in which everybody was exposed. And based on the death rate, you could pretty much conclude, he came up with an estimate of 99.7 or 99.8 survivability. Turned out he was right. I mean, his estimate, and he made that estimate in March. And based on the Diamond Princess, or April latest, but I think it was March. And so I looked at it and I said, well, based on the evidence, this is a really bad virus, like 2 years earlier, right? We'd had one there, 2018, there was a very bad virus going around, a flu, H1N1. I can't remember the details.
H1N1, yeah.
But I mean, every other year, I mean, we do have bad virus seasons. That was certainly a bad virus season. But that's how I
So
react.
we got to get back on the dessert stuff before I get taken
Okay,
down
fair
for the
enough.
fifth time.
Okay, so I added
They've
dessert
already
because
given me 4 strikes.
my dance partner wanted that dessert. So I said, well, we could split desserts. And I was feeling comfortable testing the limits of what I could do. And I had an interesting circumstance in which I was able to have the dessert with her and not have a problem. But anything I took as a leftover, if I had it on an empty stomach, I would have a problem. And so if I ate it first, it was a problem, but not if I ate it as dessert. And that's why this year, 2023, I am now root cause. So this is where I'm sort of becoming a heretic. We talked about the zealotry and a bit of the orthorexia, which is some of the people on the internet seem to think the diet will solve every single problem. But if you read the really good books, Ben Bikman has what in my mind is the very best book. You know, when people ask for a book on weight loss, I recommend Why We Get Sick, which is not a book on weight loss, because I think the first rule of Weight Loss Club is you don't discuss weight loss, discuss metabolic health. I mean, if you want to get healthy, and that includes, of course, your waist getting slender, but I'm concerned about weight loss for, being the focus for multiple reasons. And it's partially because you're not focusing on the right things, and partially because low carb is not the only answer. Bikman and Gabor Erdosi, both have pointed out that insulin resistance comes from 3 sources, not just one. A lot of people talk as if hyperinsulinemia, eating a high, insulin spiking foods is the only cause. Well, look, I love insulin because otherwise I'd be a type 1 diabetic. And cortisol I love as well. I couldn't dance as well if I didn't have a cortisol, a stress response just before the dance began. And I even love inflammation. If I get an injury or a cut, I want inflammation to stop the bleeding, to start the healing. You and I talked about this, that the guy who came up with rice, rest, ice, compression, elevation, 20 years ago, he said, I was wrong. You don't want to stop inflammation. And you don't want to completely rest. You want a little bit of light blood flow to the area of the injury or the illness. And so I love inflammation. The problem is there's acute and then there's not so acute inflammation. And the same with insulin and cortisol. The problem is if it's chronic. And Gabor is calling it chronic immune activation. Ben Bikman has talked about the same 3 sources. And cortisol comes from stress, and inflammation can come from infections. And this is why it's not always diet. And we have, beyond the fact that sometimes it's caused by other factors. In fact, I think more often than we know, we also have to explain why Katavans, why Asians who live on rice can do well, even from a diet point of view. Penn Jillette, the Penn and Teller magician.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with them?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Penn Jillette went vegan and lost over 100 pounds and has maintained it. Now, I don't want to look at vegan as necessarily a very good, diet, but you have to explain how he managed to do it and then maintain it for years. Well, it turns out he's also 23-1 OMAD. He actually does intermittent fasting, so he's keeping his insulin really, really low. Plus, he avoids all refined carbohydrates. So you go through all of that. It's not just veganism. Some of the other ways of lowering insulin. And if we just say low carb, we're missing some of the nuance. Also, when I talked about how I dieted after my wife's death and how I lost weight easily, the other thing that happened when my wife passed away, I started sleeping on a normal schedule. I mean, I adored my wife. I was happy to be her caretaker, but no doubt there was enormous stress taking care of her. When she passed away, I had a daytime schedule again. I actually was getting sun. My nitric oxide.
Yeah, all those things, getting your gut microbiome right, all these things that we're missing and we don't even understand yet. There's so much to it. That's why self-experimentation, that's what you do. And go, okay, if I have a steak, then I have a little dessert afterwards. Does it screw up my sugars? No, if you have the dessert by itself, it's going to look like a cliff going straight up, right? But, it's all these things that have self-experimentation, figure out what works for you and, let other people do what works for them.
And don't you spike your glucose happily on a regular basis? It's not food. What is it? Dr.
Drinking.
Ben.
Yeah, Dr. Ben, working out, running, all these kind of things. That will sway. So not all
Right?
sugar spikes are bad.
You want your glucose, right? You're happy to see the spike. It
Yeah,
means
because you know where it's coming from. Your body's emptying out your stores. That's okay. We don't mind that. Yeah.
It's when it's chronic. So I ended up coming up with 2 hacks I really love that nobody talks about. And I want to make sure I get these in because they both tell you a lot about it being more than low carb. The first one is a lifestyle change that's really simple. I went to visit Mike, a guy in Austin, and the thing that strikes me most about him is not that he's an a 1 meal a day carnivore. It's just what a good person he is. But I noticed his lifestyle is very similar to mine in that it's somewhat more laid back, relaxed than you would think. They have a gorgeous backyard. It's a small house, but they have a gorgeous backyard. You can see the morning. If you go back to Strong Medicine by Blake Donaldson, you will see that he doesn't just advise dietary changes. He also makes a recommendation that's very interesting, which is a morning fasted walk. And I noticed that Pennington did that, the one who was helping to slim the executives at DuPont. And Mark Sisson talks about this as well. And a morning fasted walk doesn't sound like much, but it's got 5 lifestyle factors all put in. You get sun. Again, the nitric oxide release. Paul Mason has talked about this, that he thinks the nitric oxide release rather than vitamin D is the biggest benefit of getting out in the sun. It lowers blood pressure. We know that because it's used for nitroglycerin. So release of nitric oxide, you get that if you're out. Circadian rhythm.
And sauna and cold jumps and all that kind of stuff, acute stress stuff. Yeah.
Well, right. But I don't want to, I want to tell you what one thing does, the morning walk. Circadian rhythm. You get some sunlight in the early morning, it's more likely to improve your sleep, which improves your insulin sensitivity. It's a form of exercise, of course, if you're walking, which improves insulin sensitivity. You're getting out in nature, which lowers cortisol. Also, obviously the fresh air. Of course, that's another element of COVID stupidity when they closed the beaches and the playgrounds. You wanted everybody to be outside. They shouldn't have had a lock-in. They should have had a lock-out, but that's a different issue. And of course, if you have an early morning fasted walk, you're extending the time that you're in a fasted state. So you're also improving insulin sensitivity there. I think the only thing missing is like the cold and hot therapy. So I was thinking, well, how about if we turned it into a morning swim, maybe? I live near the ocean, so it's kind of nice. We live in heaven. The nice thing about being in San Diego is that you can go outside in the morning year round. There's some places where it's just hell on earth in the summer. And it's, of course, a different form of hell in the winter. But, San Diego, we live in the perfect climate, so I can go out, 365. But I'll tell you, if I have somebody who's doing everything diet-wise, I'll make a suggestion, try an early morning walk, 30 minutes. And
that's great. That's great medicine. And we have data on that too, just being out in the country, you get oxytocin levels up, cortisol down,
Absolutely.
all that stuff. So it's all good.
And if someone says they don't have the time to do it in the morning, I'd say, well, there you go. You probably are living a very high stress life that you need to fix in some ways.
That's all good. Self-reflection.
Yeah. And the other is, I call it hack number 2. And that's not talked about. Again, there are other hacks that are talked about, like IF and the like. So, don't eat is the advice some people give, is like the simplest advice you can give. Problem is you have to eat eventually, but intermittent fasting works. But then you go to don't eat foods that spike your insulin, and that's why low carb works. But the one I really like came from Gabor again, which is don't eat foods that spike your insulin on an empty stomach. And this is where the GIP versus GLP comes in. They're talking about drugs that are GLP agonists. Well, the reason is that your small intestine, the upper half of the small intestine is where most of the insulin response is, not the lower half. So if you eat foods before you eat the cannoli or the rice or potatoes, if you want to look at more traditional, just high carb foods, what you find is you've slowed the gastric emptying, and you cause a more even incretin effect in the small intestine. And changing the food order changes everything, including the CGM response. I mean, you've got you've got patients where you give them the CGM, the continuous monitor. It would be very interesting to try out. Okay, if you eat this food that spikes your insulin on an
No,
empty
we
stomach,
absolutely see it. We
yeah,
absolutely see it.
and
Yeah,
it's
there's no question about it.
and the RCTs say it reduces the glucose response by up to 3/4, 75%. So you have 4 times the glucose response and twice the insulin response by eating it at the beginning. That's why I didn't have a problem when I had that item for dessert. But then when I had some leftovers on an empty stomach, the exact same food, suddenly it caused my nose to start running and all of the bad results. So even if you don't change the food, or even going salad, entree, dessert is not only traditional, but sensible, because you're eating the low carb foods first, you're filling your stomach with that, and you're slowing the gastric emptying. Therefore, you're causing more of the reaction of the hormones to be GLP than GIP. It's also why Roux-en-Y bypass works. It goes to the lower half of your small intestine, and therefore you don't get the insulin spike. That's why diabetes can be resolved in a matter of days. So I have to give Gabor credit for this. I came up with another mnemonic. I mentioned meds. I hope this one catches on as well. There are 4 ways you can reduce the insulin impact of carbohydrates. And this one I call SOFA, SOFA, SOFA. It's in honor of Gabor because of his Prague lecture. And also he calls himself a SOFA researcher because he reads everything while he's sitting on his couch. So structure, order, frequency, and amount. If you eat something in a structurally intact form, it has less of a glucose and insulin effect, like eating an apple instead of drinking apple juice or having applesauce. I just mentioned order, food order. If you have it at the end of the meal on a full stomach, it's so much better than having it as an appetizer or on an empty stomach. So that the bread you have at the restaurant while you're waiting for the food to be delivered could be worse than the chocolate cake you had for dessert because you have it at the beginning on an empty stomach. We know frequency. I mean, every meal, no matter how reasonable, is going to have some insulin effect. If you gather together your meals, you eat like 2 or 3 times a day and you stop snacking, even if you eat the exact same food in the exact same quantity over 24 hours, you'll have a lower insulin effect. And then, of course, the amount, and which is what, low carbers, they only think about the amount. They ignore structure, order, and frequency. So last thing, and
Awesome,
I know we're running out of time. The other versions of simplicity. Carnivore is really simple. And if you have a series of health problems, I'm never going to argue against going absolutely strict carnivore just to see what happens, because that eliminates all the bad stuff. The problem I find is it's called the cold stove problem, which is if a cat jumps on a hot stove, they're never going to jump on a hot stove again, but they're also never going to jump on a cold stove. If you take out all plants and you're cured, then you know that there was some plant causing you a problem, maybe a couple of them, but not necessarily all of them. The problem is if you stay carnivore, you'll never know. There probably were a bunch of plants you could take. But I ultimately think for a lot of people, the simplest way to go is a coach. I dance and compete. I rely on my dance teacher to structure the way we prepare. I have a personal trainer, Dan Schamberg, who I love. I actually went to him this morning, and he makes the decisions on what I should do. A doctor can help simplify life, right? You have an obesity clinic in which you look at the data, they follow your advice, and everything's feedback. There's no failure, it's feedback. And each time they visit with you, you're able to make some adjustments. And so one way to simplify your life is with a coach. I follow a paleo theory. So I love Twitter. And if I were a guy and I needed a coach, I'd definitely go to PD Mangan. This guy is in his late 60s and in the peak of health. It's a paleo theory. The idea is an old guy who's healthy means more than someone like you, a young tyke. He's in good shape.
Let's see my gray beards
like
here.
53.
Yeah.
For gals, I think Krishna Hanks. She's also in her 60s. She was a professional dancer in fantastic.
She was on, man. She's awesome. Yeah, we just had her on, and we're gonna build something here in Arizona too.
Yeah. I mean, I don't mind the youngsters. If I had someone who's having a woman in particular, but anyone who's
how about Ben Bikikio? Ben Bikikio's no spring chicken, and look at him. He's doing awesome too.
Yeah, I mean,
workouts and all that.
It's my paleo.
So Les, I gotta ask you, what's life's best medicine for you?
Easiest
My
thing.
wife's gonna shoot me.
In the world. Laughter. Laughter is life's best medicine. I think comedians live the longest in the entertainment industry. Norman Cousins cured an illness called Anatomy of an Illness. And I want you to remember that Brian, because you get on Twitter and sometimes you get really worked up. I want you to remember that laughter is life's best medicine when Anthony Fauci wins the Nobel Peace Prize, because otherwise you're not going to be able to take it.
I'll just laugh at it. What are you going to do? But thank you. Yeah, that's really important. Everyone listening, that's really, it's about metabolic health. It's about enjoying life, laughter, going through trauma as Les has, and you come out the other side and you still live and go on to be a world champion dancer. And, I think there's so much. And then just taking a part of everyone, taking a little piece of this, a little piece of that, making it mnemonics, doing things that help you to function. And really, ultimately, it's doing what works for you. So be kind to yourself, be kind to others, make your stress hormones go down, make your feel good oxytocin levels go up, and keep plugging along. And Les, we'll have you back and we'll talk some more about some of your new findings and more stuff that you come up with. And just thank you so much for joining me. Greatly appreciate it.
A real pleasure, Brian, as always. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care. Thank you for listening to this episode. We greatly appreciate your support. We would greatly appreciate a positive thumbs up on all of the platforms like iTunes and Spotify or wherever you're listening. And we just thank you for our Patreon supporters. We greatly appreciate your help in getting this message out. We think there's a lot of important information. And hopefully this helps you. Have a great day, and thank you for listening, and thank you for your support.